planet is home to an incredible variety of living things. Its oceans abound with colorful fish. The land teems with fantastic animals and plants. The air is filled with delicate insects and birds. And even puddles of water are packed with strange creatures like these. When viewed from the outside, living things, or organisms as they are known in science, really do seem to be quite different from one another. But as we will soon discover, on the inside, they are actually very much alike. That is because all living things are constructed from the same basic building blocks of life, called cells. Most cells, including this one, are so small that they can only be seen by using a microscope. But even though they are tiny, cells are perfectly capable of carrying out all of the complicated processes that need to be performed every second of every day to keep life going. The cells seen here are dividing very rapidly, and, over time, they will form the body of a frog. Frogs and many other animals are made up of billions of cells of many different types. But lots of living things are much simpler than frogs. In fact, most of the organisms on our planet are like this one and are made up of just a single cell. The little wiggling rods seen here are one-celled organisms called bacteria that are busily swimming around in a drop of pond water. Bacteria are the smallest living things and are among the simplest organisms on Earth. They belong to a special group or kingdom of living things called the Monera. Bacteria are found almost everywhere. The vast majority of them are helpful and play key roles in our environment, in industry, and in maintaining human health. These good bacteria include the decomposers that work with other organisms, such as worms and molds, to convert waste materials into nutrients that enrich the soil. The food industry uses bacteria to convert milk into cheese, yogurt, and butter. And trillions of bacteria live inside of human beings and make vitamins for our bodies to use. Unfortunately, even though most of them are good, bacteria are probably best known for the problems they cause. These include such things as food poisoning, tooth decay, strep throat, and infected wounds, to name just a few. Doctors use drugs called antibiotics to kill disease-causing bacteria. Protists are one-celled creatures that are classified into a separate biological kingdom from bacteria called the Protista. The main reason that protists are classified into a separate kingdom is that their cells are larger and a lot more complicated than those of bacteria. Protists live in moist environments. Some live in fresh water, and some live in salty water. They come in a much wider range of shapes, sizes, and colors than bacteria, and they often form into groups of identical cells called colonies, like this one. Protists play a truly enormous role in our environment. The plant-like protists produce a large amount of the Earth's oxygen, about 70 to 80% of it. They absorb lots of the greenhouse gases that warm the planet. And protists are a vital source of food for larger organisms, such as fish and shellfish. The cells of protists often have special features that aid in their survival in the natural world. For example, this protist has a red-colored eye spot that it uses to find light. Being able to do so is really helpful because these creatures need light to make food. And this strange-looking protist called an amoeba can push out the sides of its cell to create unusual structures known as false feet. An amoeba can crawl around on its false feet, and it can also use them to trap food. This protist wiggles its little tails, known as flagella, when it swims through the water. While this protist cell captures food using tiny beating hairs called cilia. And cilia can also be used for moving cells very rapidly through the water. A few protists can cause serious illnesses. In tropical climates, harmful protists are sometimes carried around in the bodies of mosquitoes, and humans can become infected when the mosquitoes bite them. Two common protist-caused diseases that are spread in this way are malaria and sleeping sickness. Multicelled organisms are creatures that are made up of large numbers of cells. Scientists classify multicelled organisms into three separate kingdoms of living things: the kingdom of animals, the kingdom of plants, and the kingdom of fungi, consisting of organisms such as mushrooms and molds. Large, complicated, multicelled organisms like this elephant are made from billions of cells. But smaller and simpler multicelled organisms like this sea anemone are made up of a much smaller number of cells. Multicelled organisms have many different types of cells. Human beings, for example, have nerve cells that respond to the environment and send messages to the brain and muscles. They also have red blood cells that carry oxygen in the bloodstream, and strong bones that are made from cells that contain large amounts of a certain mineral. In addition to these three examples, complex organisms have lots of other types of specialized cells as well, and all of them need to work together in perfect harmony in order to keep the organisms alive and healthy. When cells work together in multicelled creatures, they always form into organized groups in order to do their jobs in the best possible way. We can observe one of the ways that cells are organized by thinly slicing an onion, putting the slice on a glass slide, and adding a few drops of dye. Then, if we view the stained slice under a microscope, we will see that the cells aren't just scattered loosely about, but that groups of similar cells are neatly arranged side by side into separate layers called tissues. And forming tissues is the very simplest way that cells arrange themselves when they work together in multicelled organisms. In the much more complicated structures called organs, several different kinds of tissue layers join together to do a certain job. We can look at how different tissues are arranged in a plant organ, the stem, by cutting a very thin slice, putting the slice on a glass slide, and adding a drop of dye. Looking at the slice through a microscope, we can see that in the stem, different tissue layers are arranged alongside of one another in a certain order. And that's what makes this organ work. Besides their stems, the organs of plants also include their flowers, leaves, and roots. Each of these organs does an important job that supports the life of the plant. The stems carry water to the leaves. The leaves collect energy from the sun. The roots draw in water and nutrients from the soil. And the flowers form seeds and pollen that will make new plants. Animals have organs that are made from different kinds of tissues too. But animal and plant organs don't look very similar. That is because, as we will soon discover, plant and animal cells aren't exactly the same, and animal organs have to carry out quite different tasks from those of plants. The stomach, for example, is an animal organ that is made up of about 4 different tissue layers. The job of the stomach is to help digest food. while the heart is an organ for pumping blood that is made from several thick tissue layers of muscle cells. And the brain is an organ for processing information. The average human brain is made up of several tissue layers containing about 10 billion delicate nerve cells. The most complicated way that groups of cells work together is when two or more organs combine forces to do a certain job. These highly organized arrangements of cells that have already formed into tissues and organs are called organ systems. The human body actually has 10 different organ systems, but we'll look at just 2 of them now. In our first example, the stomach and the long twisted tubes of the intestines, along with a few other organs, join forces to form the digestive system. The purpose of this organ system is to break down food into useful nutrients and to eliminate waste materials from the body. A second organ system, known as the respiratory system, is made up of the lungs and breathing tubes. The purpose of this organ system is to deliver oxygen to the bloodstream and to help rid the body of waste carbon dioxide. In the first part of this program, we learned that all living things are made up of cells, which are the basic building blocks of life. We discovered that simple protists and bacteria have just one cell, while larger organisms, such as animals, plants, and fungi, are made up of many cells that are specialized to do certain things. And we also learned how specialized cells work together in groups, such as tissues, organs, and organ systems to carry out complicated tasks that support the life of the organism. Now we are going to learn about the basic life functions that are common to all living things. And we'll also take a look inside of cells to find out how they work and how they go about making new cells. Every living thing, regardless of whether it's a simple one-celled creature or an extremely complicated multi-celled organism, is able to carry out the same 5 basic life functions, and each of them depends on important processes carried out by cells. The first is that all living things use energy. Plants and certain other organisms can capture the energy of sunlight to power their life processes. But many creatures, whether they have just one cell or several billion cells, have to eat food to get the energy they need. The second life function is that all living things grow and develop. For example, a little seed can grow and develop into a big apple tree. The third basic life function is that all living things must get rid of wastes, because wastes are poisonous to cells. And the fourth is that all living things, both large and small, respond to their environment. Being able to respond helps creatures like this hummingbird find food and avoid danger. The fifth and final life function is that all organisms can reproduce. That means they are able to make more of their own kind. And in this way, young, healthy creatures are able to replace those that are old and worn out. Because each of the 5 basic life functions depends on the activities of cells, it is very useful to examine the main parts of a cell and learn what they do. When we look at a cell under a microscope, the first thing we notice is a large rounded structure called the nucleus. The nucleus can be thought of as the control center of the cell, because it is from here that a complex chemical substance called DNA sends out commands that control the activities of the cell. The material that lies outside of the nucleus and that makes up most of the rest of the cell is called the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is wrapped in a thin layer called the cell membrane. The cell membrane performs an important role in the life of a cell because it controls how nutrients and water enter the cell and how waste and cell products exit the cell. In plants and bacteria, a thick outer layer called the cell wall lies just beyond the cell membrane. Inside of a cell, messages from the nucleus are sent to tiny structures in the cytoplasm called organelles. There are several different kinds of organelles, and each type has its own particular job to do within the cell. This one, for example, is called a mitochondrion. These organelles act as the powerhouses of the cell because they allow stored energy to be released whenever messages from the nucleus tell them to. This kind of organelle, known as a Golgi apparatus, goes to work when it receives orders that cell products need to be packaged for shipment outside and inside of the cell. And this type of organelle, called a chloroplast, found in plant cells and the cells of plant-like protists, can capture and store the energy of sunlight. Life on Earth would soon come to an end if new cells could not be made. It would end not only because cells wear out, but also because organisms die. And making new organisms to replace them requires making new cells. As a matter of fact, every multi-celled creature alive today started out as just one cell. The original cell split into two cells by a process known as cell division. Each new cell divided to make 4 cells. Soon, those 4 cells divided into 8 cells. And as cell division continued, the total number of cells rapidly increased as tissues and organs formed. One of the most amazing things about this wonderful process is that each of the billions of new cells produced ends up with exactly the same set of DNA instructions as the original cell. And having the correct instructions means that all of the new cells are able to properly carry out their basic life functions. Every time a cell divides, it goes through exactly the same steps. The process of making new cells begins when the nucleus disappears and structures called chromosomes take shape. Human beings have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chromosomes are where the DNA from the nucleus is located while the cell is dividing. After the chromosomes have completely taken shape, they line up in the middle of the dividing cell. The chromosomes pull apart and head off in opposite directions, so that one full set of chromosomes ends up in each new cell. Then the cytoplasm slowly splits in half, and 2 new cells are born.